All right, let's begin our third and final talk for this morning. I'd like to introduce Mike Collins. Michael is the Vice President for Public Affairs with REI, a national retailer of outdoor gear and apparel, placed on Fortune magazine's 100 best companies to work for since 1998. We are very pleased to have REI here to talk and Mike to give us an outline of their efforts with respect to CSR. They are seen as one of the leaders in this strategic emphasis and have been doing so for quite some years. So we are extremely pleased to invite Mike forward to talk and give you a little bit more of an outline about their practices in this company. So please welcome Mike to the podium.
Thank you, Mark. When we were talking at the break, Mark said, you guys in this industry have a lot of fun between us and Brooks, and indeed we do. But I am here to talk about something fairly serious and that we care about a great deal. But let me tell you a little bit about REI first. How many REI members here? Oh God, we have some work to do. Okay, very good. Well, we're a national retailer. We were founded in Seattle in 1938. We were actually founded by some mountaineers that needed to get climbing equipment from Europe. And they began importing that, and that's really where the co-op began. We, this year, will open our 100th retail store. We're what we call a tri-channel retailer, meaning we sell at retail, we sell by direct, and we sell online. Last year, we did over $1.3 billion in sales. And I'd say that we've had a very strong, we've been on a good ride. We've had a very strong track record. We've had 3 years of over year-over-year double-digit increases in sales. Last year, our comp sales were over 8%, and there weren't very many retailers that were doing that. And I think that the reason that's important is because I think we're able to be successful while we're also doing the right thing. But with that growth comes some obligation, and we have continued to look at what our obligation needs to be around social responsibility. I did mention that we're a co-op. So I think the cool thing about co-ops is basically co-ops are owned by members and they're about sharing success. So anyone can be an REI member. Our goal is to share profits back to our membership in proportion to their purchases. And members also elect the board of directors. But when we're successful, we share with our employees, with our communities, and with our members. Last year, we've signed up about 10 million members since the founding of the co-op. Last year, 3.6 million active members, and we returned about $52 million in patronage dividends back to our members. This is our purpose statement. This was worked on about 5 years ago, and then in the last year, we added the "and stewardship." But we're very proud of this, and we think it provides a real guiding light for us as an organization, which is that we inspire, educate, and outfit for a lifetime of outdoor adventure. Similar to getting people out running, we think people are just better in the outdoors and that we can help them lead healthy, active outdoor lifestyles. But we also think that people want to be connected back to the environment, and that's why we added the "and stewardship." This lady is Mary Anderson. She and her husband were actually the original founders of REI. Founded, as I said, in 1938. Mary is now 98 years old. And Mary came and visited us this picture was taken at our leadership conference in March. And she is one of the few people I know who can steal the show from our CEO. And she did an absolutely fantastic job talking about her love of the outdoors, which I think is pretty special for a woman 98 years old. And she is very sharp. But the thing that Mary reminds us, and we've built an aspiration that we're not about being here today or tomorrow, but we want to be here 100 years from now. And again, that's something that we think we have a real luxury as a co-op, is that we serve our members, and we need to be successful with our members, but we're not driven by quarter-to-quarter profits. So I think we can take a longer view. And we think that's very, very important to us and to our success. So let me talk a little bit about how we think about stewardship at REI. And I think Chris hit it when he talked about integrated. We're trying to do things across our impacts. And we're not just thinking about sustainability from a product standpoint, but we think about it from a social standpoint and from a community standpoint. So social impacts, these are the workplace, the fair labor that Jim mentioned, labor in our factories, and community giving. We also think about our operational footprint, and these are the priorities that we've set as an organization. And you'll notice we're not trying to do everything, but we are trying to address the things that we think we have the most impact over. And then lastly, products. And I thought Jim spoke very well to that. And I would say that we've been doing this for a while. In the social impacts, we've been doing it for a long while. In the environmental impacts, we really have only been underway since probably about 2005. And I'd say on the product side, we feel like we are just barely beginning. But we'll talk some more about that in a minute. Jim also he really nailed it. We talk about this thing that there's no mission without margin. We have to be profitable or we can't do any of these good works. And so we keep that in mind. And I think that's very important because there's a real tendency to say throw money at these problems and it won't work. It won't be sustainable. When we started, one of the first things that we recognized we had to do was, if this is truly going to be strategic, we needed to put some governance around this. And so what we've done is created this focal group called the CSR Steering Committee, which is primarily a group of vice presidents and upper-level directors in the company. They represent the business units, and their goal is to empower, well, actually, I'll tell you what they're, first, help us set the CSR priorities. As it was said earlier, this isn't a tops-down initiative. It's kind of bottoms up and tops down. So we need to help set corporate goals for our business units, and then have different people who are different teams working on our different priority areas. The other thing is, by having the CSR steering committee, we tie into the functional managers who can basically help us allocate resources, which is point 2, sponsor the cross-divisional teams, align our strategic plan and budget. Really important. And I know this sounds like organizational work, but you got to have the organization to make the strategy. And you've got to have people beyond just supportive. You know people are committed when they actually allocate people and dollars to the efforts that you're involved with. And then lastly, accountability. The CSR Steering Committee takes all this work that we do as an organization, they review it, and we publish an annual CSR report. So what you're going to see is a lot of the outcome of the 2007 report. We did our first report in 2006. This is our second. We're marking progress against our goals. Again, to the point made, how do we measure? Well, this is how we measure, and we'll talk a little bit about why we do that. So social impacts, we've actually been, this is primarily our community engagement and being involved in our corporate giving. And we really have a very long history of outreach into the community. Again, our business, much like Jim's, it's a grassroots business. We have 2 big things that we try to do, particularly through our giving and our community engagement. And the first is get more people outdoors recreating. And the second is get people actively involved in stewardship. Get people out getting dirty and getting their hands on the trails and giving back. So in the first category, we work with organizations all over the country through supporting grants to groups, getting people cycling, hiking, and outdoors. And the real emphasis with this is looking at youth, because increasingly our industry, and I'm not sure about how the running industry is doing, if you can get I'd like to get some help on those 3 million people. But what we're seeing is more and more young people are less connected to the outdoors. And we're seeing this reflected in public land utilization, in visitations to national parks. We're seeing less kids in the outdoors, and that's a very big concern of ours. And so that's one of the huge things that we're working to address through both our community outreach and giving. The second is I talked about a little bit ago, and that is being stewards of the planet. So we do this through, again, working with a variety of conservation and park enhancement organizations all around the country. We actually have been doing this for quite some time. We started a corporate giving program in 1975 with $12,000 that went mostly to the state of Alaska for protecting some wildlands in Alaska. We also started a service project program in 1975 that now every one of our stores does a minimum of one service project a year, which is they basically go out and they give back to their community, and we invite members. But we're also looking at how do we leverage that and work with lots of other organizations that also are working to those ends. This year we'll do about $3.5 million in grants. About 2 million of those will be nominated directly out of our retail stores. So retail store employees will nominate the grantees in these two categories, and that's how the funding gets done, because we believe that we have to be we're a specialty retailer, and in order to be a specialty retailer, we have to be relevant to that local community. I talked about this a minute ago, but really engaging youth in the outdoors. In addition to the giving to the programs, we have 3 things that we work on. One right now is called the Kids Passport to Adventure. So if you come into an REI store, you can pick up a kid's passport. There's a whole list of family-friendly trails and hikes and cycle rides that you can go on. You get your passport stamped, and at the end of it, you receive a prize from REI. The second thing we've developed is a thing called the Peak Pack, and that stands for Promoting Environmental Awareness in Kids. And this was done with a group called the Leave No Trace Center in Boulder. And the idea is, how do you teach young people about the outdoors? How do you also teach them about appropriate use of the outdoors? So the Peak Pack program, volunteers can take it out. You can take it to a youth group or to a scouting organization, basically, or a school, and run this program and get kids excited about the outdoors while teaching them outdoor ethics. This started as just being for our employee volunteers and has since grown to where we're getting requests from clubs and organizations that want to make this part of their ongoing, the ongoing things that they offer their memberships. Lastly is a thing called gear banks, and these are pretty cool. We only have 5 of them in some of our bigger markets, but one of the barriers we know a lot of times is that people, or particularly people who may not have had outdoor experiences, don't have the equipment. So what the gear banks do is they're basically free rentals that we have in some of our stores, so that organizations can come in and they can get free rentals for particularly young people to go out and have a nice outdoor experience. If you don't go out and have something that's comfortable and dry, you're probably not going to get a good start in the outdoors. So we want to help that get started. Last year, about 3,000 young people were able to take advantage of that program. And we're looking at how do we push that out to more of our stores, because there's definitely a demand. Let me talk a little bit about that grassroots approach, and we'll just use this in Chicago as an example, which is where we're opening a new store later this year. It'll be our 4th store in the market. So through store-nominated grants, we're working with a group that goes out and is doing conservation work in the community, primarily on recreation areas. We're working with a group called Inner City Outings, which is actually a program of the Sierra Club, which gets young people, particularly kids from underserved communities, a first outdoor experience. So right now, we're helping underwrite 5 outings for 100 kids. And what's cool about that, or what's important about that, is that a lot of programs take a kid out once, you're done, and next kid. This one is, how do you keep the kids engaged and actually give them a sense of competency and a greater sense of awareness and enjoyment. This again is another stewardship grant. Camber is a mountain biking group that's about helping do stewardship on mountain biking trails. So giving back, mountain bikers sometimes have access problems. By giving back, they get more, people are more interested in giving them access to the trails. Chicago Wilderness, another group doing outreach to kids about kids in the outdoors. And then 2 last, Bikes Belong and Big City Mountaineers. Up until these 2 grants, these were all local grants done by the stores. Big City Mountaineers and Bikes Belong are national grants that have tentacles into a lot of cities, including Chicago. So through this approach, what you get is this bottom-up grassroots, what do people care about in that community, and then connect with your larger national organizations that are also working in communities across the country. I mentioned our grants budget, which you can see has grown significantly with the company's growth since the year 2000. One thing that I'm really proud of is that little shaded green spot there. That blip is the year that REI became a billion-dollar retailer. And we actually had some mixed feelings about that because at the end of the day, we are business people and we are happy with our business success. But at the same time, it's also kind of an indicator that we're getting to be big. And so we said, well, how do we celebrate that? How do we celebrate that in a way that seems meaningful? And so what we decided to do is that if we hit the $1 billion in sale that year, we would set aside another $1 million for our giving program. And the idea was we would invest a $10,000 grant in every REI community across the country, including the communities that have our distribution centers and our warehouse. These were incredibly powerful grants. And I had one of our board members say, did we really get $1 million of value out of that grant? This is a question you always get from your board. And I said, you know, I don't know. I really don't. But I can tell you, talking to the different communities, we got $10,000 of value 100 times over. And that was worth doing. Okay, so just part of reporting is we try to tell people what the metrics are. So through the programs that we've funded and been directly engaged in, over 700,000 people recreating in the outdoors. Over 14,000 miles or acres of land and almost 10,000 miles of trails received some level of enhancement because of REI, either direct action or partnership funding. Over 2 million hours of volunteer service, and we're really proud of that number because we think that getting people engaged as volunteers gives them a deeper connection to the land. And particularly with young people, again, we're looking for who are the next stewards of our planet, who are the people who will care about the outdoors. 140,000 kids through the Peak Pack program, and over $600,000 donated through our workplace giving. That's not a huge number, but for a retail company, it's a darn good number. And then we match that number for our employees. This is a new piece for us that I wanted to touch on really quickly, and it's the REI Foundation. One of the challenges that the outdoor industry has, the specialty outdoor industry has, is a lack of diversity. And you're going to see that in our HR numbers when I get to that in just a minute. So the REI Foundation is different than REI corporate giving, which we see as being year over year, how do we support the communities that we're in? The REI Foundation, we're saying, how can we take a longer view? How can we take a 10, 15, 20-year view and say what's going to be important to this country and to the society as we move forward? And what we came up with was this mission, which is that the REI Foundation mission is to ensure that tomorrow's outdoor enthusiasts and conservation stewards reflect the diversity of America. And I will tell you that we are just beginning and we have a ton of learning and listening to do, but we think that this is the right place to start. And this is just some things that talk about that we want to make it open and accessible to all, and then obviously focus on young people. If you look at the demographics of this country, today's young people are by definition much more demographically diverse than the baby boomer who is our core customer, and we need to find ways to make the outdoors, and particularly specialty outdoors, important to our next generation. So in our kind of overall social, completing the puzzle is we have our giving and community programs that I've described to you. We do a fair bit of advocacy, both at the state and federal level, talking about making sure that we have appropriate funding for public lands. We think that that's important. And again, a lot of companies won't do that piece, but we think it's an important element for us. We have grassroots store outreach. Our stores are amazing, and they do a great job connecting into their community, being actively involved, bringing people in for education and other types of activities. And then the REI Foundation providing that longer view, which we think is very, very important. Very quickly, one of the things we have been talked about as a great place to work. I think we are. I've certainly enjoyed it. We 2 years ago added healthcare for every employee through a program called PATH. We think that's pretty unusual for a retailer. We've been on the 100 best list, as it was called out. And One of the things that is we've gotten into reporting, we have very high employee engagement scores. So we do annual surveys of our employees. The engagement scores on some critical questions, very, very high. So we have a really dedicated and passionate employee base. But again, we have some opportunities. One of which is the diversity question again. And if you look, this is reflective of the specialty outdoor industry, and it indicates that for REI, we have a lot of work to do. As we look forward, we have a significant initiative going on that we're looking at grassroots outreach. So how do we start to think about connecting to communities? And before we start to try to sell anything, how do we start to think about what communities that are different than, again, our core customer, what do they need? How do we become relevant to them? So again, we have a lot of learning to do there. We are looking at employee diversity, and that again is very important because people need to feel a sense of comfort in the stores that they come into and feel that they see themselves reflected, whether it's in the employees or in the marketing materials or in the general way that they're treated. And then lastly is really thinking about how are people treated once they become an employee or once they become a customer. And so working on that to make sure that we as an organization understand how to do that and that we have the competencies and leadership that will allow us to be successful there. Jim talked about factory. This is, I think actually this is a great example of, in the early 1990s, a lot of people weren't paying attention to necessarily the way that their products were being made elsewhere in the world. I think the same thing's going on right now environmentally, that a lot of people haven't connected where the things are being made with the products that you're purchasing. But we know that people do care about this, and we believe that customers should feel a sense of assurance that when they buy something from us, that it was made by people under appropriate conditions. And if we're a great employer for the people who work directly for us, should we not make sure that there's an appropriate working relationship for those people who actually create the things that carry our brand? We also, we do our auditing, and we do report on our auditing. This is a very high-level look, and what you'll see is every factory we work with goes through some level of audit, whether it's a self-audit or it's a third-party audit, meaning that we have paid auditors go in and go through a very extensive look at the factory's practices. So where it says number of audits, right now we do third-party audits for about 60% of our factories. That's actually industry standard, I think, very high. But if you look at the other side, it actually covers about 90% of what we sell by dollar volume. So we feel like we're doing a pretty good job there. But this is an area that you're kind of never done, and you're kind of never doing a good enough job, and you want to always be thinking about what's next. And to that kind of moving on to that, one of the things we're looking at is how do we, right now the numbers I showed you are for REI brand, things that carry our label. So how do we think about all the other things that we carry in our stores? When customers come in, they buy from REI, they don't differentiate whether it's REI or Brooks, they just know they got it at, well, they do differentiate that, but they hold us accountable as well as hold the vendor accountable. So we're looking at saying, how can we work with our vendors to have a level of assurance that the products that we sell are meeting the labor thresholds that we'd like to see. And one of the ways we've done that is we've been involved with our industry association, the Outdoor Industry Association, to look at creating a toolkit that helps organizations have a model that they can put in place and begin to get a start on the path to doing a better job with labor compliance. The outdoor industry has a lot of young, innovative, fast-growing companies. Some of them are, there are companies that will start as 3 people, and in 5 years there'll be 30 people and sales networks. And so this isn't always top of mind. By giving them a toolkit, what we can do is increase their competency really fast and also give us better assurances about where products are coming from. As Jim also mentioned, I was glad to see he was talking about root causes, because there's challenges with the auditing system. It's sort of a catch me if you can approach. And so you don't want to have to be in constant remediation. So how do we move beyond remediation? And that's one of the things that we're talking about. So let me dive into sustainability. First, ours didn't start with customers. Ours started with employees. And I think the reason was because employees, our employees care about the outdoors, they're passionate, and they're in the back rooms of our stores and they see what really happens. They see the packaging that gets thrown away. They see the business practices that appear wasteful or could be or are wasteful. And so they were pushing us hard in 2005 to say, we need to be doing something different and better. It's great that we give money, it's great that we do these things, but we're not doing enough with our own business. And so that is where the energy of our work came from. One of the things you're going to see is that we recognize that because of the type of people we have, every good decision that could be made by an individual had already been made when it came to sustainability and the environment. But we needed to move beyond just intuition and random acts of kindness and start to say, if we're really going to attack this, we have to be more strategic. And in order to be strategic, you also have to have metrics. You have to know what you're working toward. So in 2005, I led a group that brought leaders from around the country, 23 of us, and we spent time thinking about what our impacts were as an organization. And then we said, of those, what are the ones that we think we have the greatest ability to influence? And from that, we identified 5. Climate change and energy, green buildings, responsible paper, waste, and products. Excuse me. And so let me dive into each of those briefly. And one of the things I'll say is that when we started, for each of those categories, we set what we call a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. And we set it and said, in 2020, what would this look like? And the reason we did it that way is because you have to set your goal in this stuff far enough out that you have to reimagine the way you do things, but you can't set it so ridiculous that no one believes it or you can never get there. And then you back it up and say, okay, now in the next 3 years, how are we going to move forward on that? The first one is green buildings. Our aspiration is to build all REI buildings to national green building standards. So why do we do this? Well, we think it's a better retail experience, actually. We hope and know that it can reduce our environmental impacts. We're working on how to show that it can reduce our cost of operations, and we believe that to be true, but I'll tell you, it's darn hard to prove that. Particularly when you take cost out, people go, well, that's gone. And so it's real hard to get credit for that. That's one of the things we're working on right now. And then lastly, we're an outdoor retailer, so people expect that we're going to be kind of on the front of this, because if we're not, then how credible are we as caring about the outdoors? You'll also notice that we didn't put LEED here as a standard, although it's sort of the unwritten standard that we work for. But LEED, which is it's a certification process, it's complex, it's a point system that you can kind of work depending on how you want to go after your points. But we haven't gotten to where we can say we're totally going to go after LEED as a corporate standard, because it still creates potential issues for us to be able to do our base business. We hope that there are changes in LEED coming that will allow us to certify a concept and move forward more quickly. So I'd love to get there. So for me, this one's still a little squishy, but that's okay. We're moving in the right direction. One thing that our stores have been pretty green since we opened the Seattle flagship store in 1995. That has a lot of green technology in it before anyone was figuring out how to measure green. But last year we opened a new prototype store in Boulder, Colorado. And for any of you who have been in an REI store, this is like no REI store you've ever seen. Very different in terms of its finishes, its lighting, and I've got to say the way that the product presents in the store is really pretty amazing. It just pops out at you, which is a good thing for a retailer. What you see on the far right, those are called integrated photovoltaics. We actually have 3 different energy strategies in this store, 4 if you count the stuff that just comes in over the wire as regular electricity. The integrated photovoltaics are actually, they're photovoltaics that are built into the glass that are part of an atrium. So they're both a window and they're creating electricity. We used lots of sustainable materials, and I won't go into them all, but rapidly renewable, sustainable materials. So we really redid our materials palette in the store. We did the low flow water, which I think people would expect. But the other energy things are, we have solar panels on the roof that's basically taking care of all of the store's hot water needs. And then the odd looking thing that looks like a trash can with a bubble on the top, that's called a solar tube. These are really cool, and particularly in a place like Boulder because you get so much light there. But they're big tubes that come into the store and they bring natural light in, but they are so bright because the way the light comes through and magnifies. So in all, we think this is a very energy efficient store. This was part of a prototype to look at the entire way that retail stores do their business. So sustainability was built in as a critical metric, but there were lots of other things we experimented with there. We actually are trying to get LEED silver for that store, but it's still in process. We also last year opened a distribution center in Bedford, Pennsylvania. It's our second center. It is certified LEED silver. And again, we think it's just a better experience and it's a more efficient building. I know that we have a commitment to this when we start to certify our distribution centers, because it's one thing to do something customer facing, but this is back of the house. Nobody sees this. Nobody goes to Bedford, Pennsylvania. But we felt like that was the right way to do this. Okay, second, waste management. We have an aspiration to be zero waste to landfill by 2020, and we're actually figuring out if we can do that. Our goal for 2009 is we're going to reduce our waste to landfill by 50% from our 2006 baseline. So through working, one of the things that's hard about some of this is actually finding the data. Nobody's collecting a lot of this information. So what we had to do is go through and pull out utility information as well as do a fair bit of dumpster diving to find out what's out there in our stores. What you see is across our facilities, the waste. The dark green is what's already being diverted from landfill. So we're doing pretty darn well. But what we have to do is look at the sandy colors and cut those in half by 2009. This is tough for a retailer, because we don't, in some of our stores, there's not even recycling in some of our communities and some of the centers that we're in. And so we have to even find people who will come and do the recycling. So that's number one. But again, we've got a pretty good start here. Of course, the other way to take this on is not to bring so much junk into the store to throw away at the beginning. And we have actually hired a packaging engineer who's looking at how to deal with collateral, or the stuff that goes on the product, as well as what we call transit packaging, which is all the plastic films and papers and everything. Employees want this to be better. They see the garbage and it makes them mad. And every time I visit a store, they say, why can't we? And it's like, okay, we're working on it. Responsible paper. This is an area that, obviously for an outdoor company, we better be doing a good job getting paper from great forests. And paper it's a great resource. It's a rapidly renewable resource, but it has the potential to be a fairly damaging one. So what we've been looking is saying, how do we know where our paper comes from, and going all the way back to the stump of the tree that paper came from, and being able to understand that. And this is one of those competencies of business that we have to start getting good at, because the consumer and activists are helping people understand why this is important. This is our paper utilization. Again, took a lot of people a lot of time to get to this number. One of the biggest ways that we market is direct mail. So we have a big direct mail footprint, that's 62%. So what we're trying to do is say, okay, if we're going to use that much paper and we're going to use it wisely, how do we get the most environmentally preferred paper that we can? So that we know that the original fiber came from a great place, that we're using as much recycled as we can, and wherever we can certify all of the above. We had some pretty aggressive goals this year. The good news is we know about 90% now of where all of our paper is coming from. The last 10% is commodity stuff that's really hard to track. And the other thing is we blew away our goal of moving towards certified paper, which I'm very pleased with, because that's sort of the gold standard. Our certification standard is Forest Stewardship Council, which is the highest level of certification, and we think that's pretty awesome. This is an important thing, though, because we want to stay out of forests that we shouldn't be cutting in. Chris talked about climate neutral, and we also set that goal. This is one of those interesting ones. You get a group of people together and you look into the future and you say, what do we want to do? We want to be climate neutral by 2020. And everyone goes, yes. And then when you get to your 2009 goal and you start to tell people, okay, here's what we need to do by 2009, they go, who set that goal? And so that's one of those things that this is where this work starts to get interesting. This is actually what we did about a year ago. We did our carbon footprint, and we worked with BGI, folks from the Bain Graduate Institute as well to help us. And what we had to do is figure out where this information was. But I firmly believe that we had such poor visibility to this information that simply by being able to see it, we're going to figure out how to save money. The big thing you'll see is that our adventure travel company, we thought product transportation was going to be like our big one. It's not. It's number 4. So a lot of times what you think you know, you don't really know until you actually get into the numbers. REI Adventures, which is our adventure travel company, biggest part of our carbon footprint. That's putting people on airplanes, and right now there's not a good way to try to address that aside from not flying, and that doesn't work so well for a travel industry. But what we did do is we were able to come up with a deal where we were able to offset all of that carbon. So that's why you see that kind of pulled out a little bit. But we still have a tremendous amount to do. Looking at our electrical utilization through all of our facilities, and then employee commuting is a huge one, and one that we're actively engaged on right now. So between 2006 and 2007, the good news is we reduced our greenhouse gas footprint by 24%. So we're well on our way to carbon neutrality, except that our base grew. And this is the challenge that everyone's going to have with looking at how to become carbon neutral, is if you're growing and you're getting bigger, your footprint keeps getting bigger. So you have to keep figuring that out. We have 3 prongs, and they're in priority order. Number 1, conservation, and avoid using the electron in the beginning, because that's the greenest you can be. Secondly is looking at green power and renewables. So it's either direct power purchasing, direct green power energy contracts, or direct generation. This, we just approved and announced that we're going to be doing solar on 10 of our stores this year. I don't think it covers all of the store electricity, but it's a really good start. The last thing, and I'm not going to even try to explain it, is the whole offsetting business. We have a very high standard for offsets, and we think they're legitimate, but you have to have really good ones, and that's kind of the thing of last resort for us in terms of trying to become carbon neutral. Last is responsible product, and I would just say the little logo there that says eco-sensitive, we did start to look at some of our products that had strong environmental performance attributes, and we put the eco-sensitive label on there. But we also did a lot of transparency in terms of saying, here's the pros and cons of that material. 2 years ago, when we started on this journey, we were putting these little stickers on our clothes that said sustainable product, which, you know, a group of us got around and said, are those products sustainable? So just because the shirt's organic cotton, this shirt may be organic cotton, but I don't know about the dye. I don't know about the buttons, and I don't know about the whole life cycle of this shirt. So when you start to make those claims, you have to be very careful. And that's why this is such a tricky place. I'd say we're still trying to get our hands around this. It's big and it takes a long time. And if I could snap my fingers and make all of our designs start today to be green, you wouldn't see it in the stores for 18 months because that's how long it takes to bring a product to market. So again, we're just kind of getting started here. Brooks has also been part of this outdoor industry eco working group, which is trying to figure out what are the attributes, what's an index of what creates a green product. If we have common definition, we can collaboratively work toward actually becoming green. So we put all of this, and the URL is the website. And you can go out there, and there's a whole lot of detail because we feel like you have to report on this in order to really hold yourself accountable and have other people hold you accountable. So why do it? Transparency. People, if they don't see what you're doing, then they assume what you're doing or not doing. Identify and being accountable for your impacts. You know, we're going to tell you what we're good at and what we're not good at and where we're improving. We need to have in order to do this, we have to be able to measure it. So if you know you're going to report, you have to come up with good ways to measure. We think if we report others might report to. We can influence other people to be as transparent as we're trying to be. Obviously, it's demonstrating an authentic commitment to sustainability. And lastly, you learn and improve from your critics. So I talked about forest products. There's some pretty prickly groups working on forest product issues, and we've talked to several of them. And the fact is that we don't agree with everything they have to say, but we've learned and gotten better because we had those conversations. And I can tell you there's sometimes kind of hard conversations, but if you don't listen to people who have a different point of view, you're probably not going to get better in this space. So just quickly, keys to the progress we've made. Well, this stuff is all very much grounded in who we are as a company. I talked about our employees. It is a company-wide initiative. Nobody owns this. I don't own CSR. It's owned by the organization. We looked out there and framed big goals. We have governance in place, support and commitment. Support, everybody's supportive of this. Commitment is when they give you dollars to do it. Focus, as again Jim said, got to be focused on this stuff. Communication and education. So part of it's telling people what you're doing, but the other part is actually building organizational understanding and IQ to get better. And lastly, substance. And there's a lot of green talk, but you've got, I think there's a kind of a coming green smackdown for those people who are just talking and not really thinking about what that means. And then the question comes up, will people pay more? And if you're selling houses, I think that's a really good question. But if you're selling outdoor products, I don't think they should have to pay more. I think that if you're smart about it, you got to figure out how to, this is a performance expectation. And for a while, everyone used to pay more for quality. Quality is pretty good across the board, so now you're paying for performance, right? You're paying for features. This is a feature. And profitability. So you can't leave people behind. Business owners have to own the goals, and you have to get, somebody has to pay for this. And as I just said, challenging cost plus thinking, and then being focused and reconciling high expectations. Resource needs are another form of budgeting, and then getting the data. Getting information is really tough. And then lastly, supply chain complexity. We can't do any of this alone. We have to have the material people helping us. We have to have the transit people helping us. We can't do it by ourselves. I'm going to skip over these because I think we've talked about them all. This one about measuring ROI, this is a tough one. Showing people that traditional payouts like on solar make sense. It's just, you have to kind of develop a new language with folks. And then lastly, I'd say we're picking up some headwind. So we started in 2005 and people were gung-ho, and we did do the low-hanging fruit. And now we kind of come into the valley and people are saying, wow, this is harder than we thought it would be. And now we're having to spend more money than we thought we'd be. And so we have to work through that. But I'm confident that we will. But you know, you kind of do the easy stuff and then you actually get into the hard stuff. And I think this will become integrated into the business and it will get back to being easier. At least that's what I'm telling myself. Okay, so the trail ahead. First is sustainability is an organizational competency to create and protect business value. We really believe that. This is not just about more money. This is about how do you get better as a business. And then if you look through the lens, you can actually find opportunities you didn't know were there. And again, we believe that you can be the best businesses are the best at this, and that's what we want to do. And with that, I'm sorry I went through a lot fast, but I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. Yeah.
So this is kind of for all the speakers. When it comes to CSR, how much is the social obligation compared to actual corporate caring?
How much is social obligation to, well,
Do corporations feel pressure into doing these things like these CSRs for the city, or do they really want to do it?
I think it's, and I'll let other people answer this too, but I think it's, yeah, I think it's all of the above. I mean, for our customer and our member actually on our sustainability stuff, our member thought we were already doing it. If they found out we weren't doing it to the level we are now, they would have been really disappointed. Our employees care a lot about it. But from that standpoint, the other thing is we just feel like as this is good, it's good business, but it's also, and I hate to say it's the right thing to do, but isn't this what you want to come to work to be about? So I do think that those things come together. And the one thing you didn't mention is there is a measure of risk management too. I mean, again, if you're not in the norm, people are going to note that and wonder why. But
You know, I think it's a great question, and I think when you all sit around the table, you can decide at a personal level that it's something we care about, and we just need to do business that way. But it's absolutely a business imperative. In our company, Warren Buffett has often said with the managers, you know, we've got plenty of money, but we don't have a bit of reputation to spare. And if you don't feel comfortable doing what you're doing, that it would make the front page of the paper from a critical, you know, hardworking reporter, then you shouldn't be doing it. And you know, at the end of the day, we're a brand. REI is a brand. We're a brand, so you know it will destroy our brand if we're not good stewards on the social responsibility side. So it's both. It's a business imperative.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's at the end of the day, we ultimately are responsible to our investors. So it doesn't matter why it is the way it is that we come to profit. That is what we're there for. But the good news is that it's an imperative now in order to make money. And it's not only as an imperative in terms of what our customers demand, but it also has a lot to do with these guys are talking about in terms of attracting talent, because it's a lot harder to hire in this kind of environment unless you have the kind of programs that attract young, talented people.
It's a good question, and I'm not sure of a lot of times, like on some of the carbon things, they're really oriented more for, you know, sort of big emitters. I'm not sure of everything that the state of Washington is doing right now. I'd say that for a retailer, the complexity is that 50 states are all doing it. And so from a retail standpoint, that's very difficult, because if every state has their own sort of regulation and different way of taking this on, that's tough, and it's tough to be in compliance. That said, we actually think business is, progressive businesses are leading in front of most of what's happening out of Olympia and places like that. So we think we're pretty well positioned for that regulation, at least for reasonable things that could come out of those. Yeah.
You mentioned this idea that there's more runners than, 3 million more runners who often are running in their local parks or areas that are outside. I'm wondering whether there's a chance of some kind of synergy, because you're almost implying there's kind of a contradiction here, that there are more outdoor people running around in their local environment, they're not running in the national park, and there's less money for national parks and less investment in that public space. And if there's any ways that we can have this growth in outdoor activity, but actually fairly localised activity to public spaces, that of course your industry is interested in getting people into those big public places.
Yeah, and I let Jim jump in too, but we think that close to home recreation is increasingly important. It's where people are getting their first outdoor experiences. And so, I'm pretty convinced that if somebody becomes a runner, we have a lot better chance that they're ultimately going to become a hiker. But we're starting to see, and a lot of the work that we're doing is actually focused really close to home rather than further out, for the convenience of our members, but also because that's where what we call we used to call it done in a day, but now we call it done every day, because people are actually, they're trying to carve out an hour or two to go out and do something. In Seattle, you're starting to see some pretty innovative uses of public lands, like the Colonnade Park, if you're familiar with that, which is a mountain biking park under the freeway, which had been sort of this vacant lot, nothing place that has been gone in and redeveloped as a mountain biking park. It's a great use of land that's not particularly good, and it's a great way of exposing people to mountain biking. So yes, absolutely. We think, and if they have that experience there, then we think there's an opportunity to get people to go a little further from home. Did I get at your question? Yeah.
Shad. I think one of the most exciting things in the running lifestyle is what's happening in the outdoors. Fastest growing events include adventure races, which are obviously run through wilderness and up and down mountains, and also triathlon. So there's a wide variety of things that people are doing on the running, but the core of it is the community race. And you know, what's interesting about that is they'll close down the streets and have a community event and typically raise money for a cause and connect with the local community on that. So it's, for us, so much of it is just about getting people out and getting people moving. Obviously, a lot of people are walking, which is what it's all about. So, you know, we're seeing it happen very much on a local level. That's really where running happens. Some people travel to races, some people travel to these adventure events, but the vast majority run locally.
When you think about the product that we package, we are in the business of making houses and hotel rooms, but what we're really selling is access to the outdoors in ways that people feel comfortable. So in a way, we're actually in the same kind of business. And for some people, that may mean getting on their mountain bike and going for a 30-mile ride on our trails, and for others, it means sitting and having a cocktail looking at the view. So, you know, ideally, we are in the business of educating people on how to get to the outdoors. And when you really extrapolate that, humor aside, your average customer in Suncadia is new wealth, and are people who are their families are now in a position to become recreators, become engaged in the outdoors in these ways. And so, ideally, this is a foothold, and we're teaching people how to get outside.
My email's up there. If there's a question that you didn't get to ask, feel free to drop me a line, and if you're patient, I'll get you an answer. Thank you very much.
All right. When we first put this slate of speakers together, we were thrilled to get all three representatives from some really prominent companies here in the Northwest. But I'd have to say that their talks today have far outdone our expectations in really bringing us up to speed in an important area. So I'd like you to put your hands together. We have a small token of our appreciation, but just to really let the speakers know how much we appreciate them taking the time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.